Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another show of Sheba Chronicles. This is your host, Wayne Clingman, and today, as you know, I usually do over-the-top introductions for my guests. Today is a very serious topic with a very serious guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a filmmaker of filmmakers, a man who's put his money, his reputation on the line, illustrating a horrific problem going on in Racine, Wisconsin. He's done so with his documentary, Pattern of Practice. I give you the famous Jim Spodick. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Wade. That's quite an introduction.
Usually they're far more verbose, but the point being, it is a serious topic. But before we get into the topic of the film yourself, why don't we have a little bit of your background for the people out there who may not have heard of you yet, sir?
Okay. Well, actually, it's not all that glamorous. I started out actually in a grocery store and working. From there, I went into construction, development of properties, and that's really what led me to where I am today. I really was a developer and developing properties in the city of Racine, and that's where, it kind of ran into a group of people, I guess, that changed my view of certain things, and I wanted to get that story out, and that's where the documentary came from in the filmmaking. And I'm sure there's a lot better filmmakers out there, but this particular instance, I felt there needed to be a story told, and that's why we did it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this for the audience understands, in full disclosure, I've known Mr. Spodick for a while. And I've known you when you started developing properties on 6th Street. I knew you when you had that grocery store downtown Racine, right? And some of the other activities that you have. And I was surprised, to say the least, that you leaped in as you did, not only with Car 25, and that's the TV station that we had in the day, but you embraced filmmaking as a story, as a way to go and tell a story. So what caused you to get so motivated, what was going on in Racine, that you had to do a documentary on it?
Well, let's start from the beginning. I owned a number of properties on 6th Street, and 6th Street at this particular time was somewhat run down. It was questionable tendency. It was, kind of transient individuals as far as businesses and individuals in general. So I started to remodel the buildings, kind of gave it a new life. These buildings sat, within a view of Lake Michigan, so they had the potential to be, some neat old buildings. So as I developed them, I started to, get tenants, and in developing from a kind of a grassroots level, you don't start out with, IBM. You start out with what you can gather, and people that are going to be saying, hey, it's cheap rent, usually artists, really. They come into an area, and then they kind of just, as it develops, they actually are taken out, and then, more, the Starbucks and different things come in. But I rented to, actually, I started a little grocery store to kind of get things started. And then I rented to Thomas Holmes, which was an African-American gentleman who ran a nightclub in Milwaukee. He ran different venues. He had kind of I guess he'd like a variety show out of some of the bigger theaters in Milwaukee. He came in. Now, I have to preface and go back a little bit because actually I had rented to an attorney and his partner, which was a German woman who actually did salsa dancing, and they were going to do a salsa club. Well, when we went in for license for the club, I was given all kinds of, I wasn't, but they were given all kinds of restrictions, and a number of times they had to go back for different reasons, for whatever. And, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. They eventually got their license and moved forward. During this process, they split up, and it hadn't quite been open, but the attorney contacted Mr. Holmes. Mr. Holmes came in. We sat one afternoon at a bowling alley, and we put the deal together, and he came in. And then at that point, it was just, owner-tenant relationship. He did his thing, I did mine, and I moved on to different things. Well, then I get a call from him saying, hey, you know what, I'm having problems down here. I feel like I'm being targeted. People are, giving me problems. And he had a mostly minority clientele, young kids. I mean, we're talking a bar, we're talking nightclub, but again, we're in, to start out at the bottom and you kind of move up. And he was successful and I trusted him. And at that point, it started to escalate into cameras on the street and there's these I was starting to get violations in the mail. The building had the street numbers weren't big enough. The window was cracked. The third floor door wasn't painted. I mean, and it was like, what the heck's going on? Then he was called into the committees to, and from that point, it was escalating to the point where they finally took away his liquor license because of incidents at his bar. And of course, I'm speeding it up, but this is kind of what goes on in the documentary. But at the end of that, I was home, and I remember the police came to my home. This is right before Christmas, and served me with the nuisance property. And at that point, I was going to let things kind of go. And at that point, I got kind of ticked off, and I thought, something's more. There's more here. And I had gone to some of the hearings prior to it, and I just did not like what I was hearing. So at that point, I started to research, what was going on in the community, and that's an area where I think most people don't do, and they really should, is to get into their local governments. I mean, we complain about, Washington, D.C., but we really need to get into our local governments and see what's really going on around us, because we can go down to the city hall and we can go to meetings, and those are some of the things that, we neglect as citizens. And I decided to start looking into it, and what I found was pretty disturbing. As far as I think there was some racial discrimination. Well, I know there was, and targeting, and of course I brought it up. And being a white guy, what's wrong with you? You're just pissed off, and I was, and I'll be honest with you, I was, but I knew what was right and wrong, and I knew there was constitutional rights being violated. And so then it was at this point I thought, and the real estate market was taking a dump in 2007, 8, and it was a good time, and I probably had the time. So I thought, well, I'm gonna start looking into this.
Right. What gets me, I've had the pleasure of seeing the movie a couple of times. What gets me is you didn't have to go very far to start getting information. A lot of stuff that you have in the movie is fully documented by things that were shown by the local cable channel as part of the government print practice, correct?
Correct. Well, what I did first, Wayne, was I contacted, there was a local newspaper in town. It was a minority newspaper called The Insider, and it was run by a guy named Ken Lumpkin, who's in the film. And I just said, hey, is this for real? What I'm seeing here is, what I did was I read some of his articles, and he talked about, the minority clubs, bars, restaurants being targeted. And, it's always it can't really be happening. It's not really happening here kind of mentality you get. Well, I went to his office and I sat down with him and talked to him, and, the guy was legitimate. And then he tells me a story of how, he had been in the civil rights movement in Montgomery, Alabama. He actually was at Martin Luther King's in Dexter Street or whatever it was, Baptist Church. And so he was from the ground up, and he said, I can spot this stuff a mile away. And so he kind of educated me a little bit. And, of course, I just kind of went with it. So I started looking at city records, and I went back, 8 or 10 years and went through every meeting minute and started to see a pattern of how they were closed, and the technique was really similar in all the different bars, but they happened to all be minority bars, and some of the incidents were not severe incidents, but they either wanted the property or they were located where they were either going to develop, or for whatever reason there was even other bar owners who were going to make offers on the bar when they were taken away. So I he actually said, well, you should write some stories for this. Well, what I did was he kind of pointed me in a direction to start a little newspaper, and it was called The Communicator. And so I never did a newspaper before. I didn't have any idea how to do it, but I wrote some stories, and then I had some other people help me write stories and kind of just put these statistics together. Because prior to this, the local NAACP had done a program or a report on discrimination in the city of Racine, and it got some news, but it was kind of poo-pooed because it didn't have statistics in it. And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, well, if I'm going to do this, I've got to have statistics. I've got to have the actual numbers. So I went to the police department. I got police records. I went to the local radio, TV station at the time, which was the Car 25, and I would get the discs for the actual meeting. So I would sit down and look at the meeting, compare it to the notes or to the minutes, and then I would, compare it to police reports. And I started to put graphs together and where they were located, what happened to the building. I went down to as far as to not only all the assaults and criminal activity, civil disturbances, drug activity, whatever. I graphed it all, and came to find out that there were actually Caucasian white establishments that had actually more problems, and were not subject to the same standards. And then I started to watch the actual meeting minutes, and I would see, just blatantly say, well, we're going to add to this particular bar, we're going to do a contract, and they're going to have to do these certain things. But because, well, in one instance, it's like an insurance policy, just to keep this, in case we got a problem, we can get out of it quicker. Well, you had a bigger problem with the white establishment, but you didn't do it. So, I started to see this, and it's in plain daylight. I mean, for most citizens that, and I'm not saying that it happens everywhere, but most things that are done in government can be looked at if you go there and watch it. And that's one of the things that kind of really got me kind of, somewhat intrigued, but also somewhat disgusted with. So I started the newspaper, The Communicator, ran that for about, 7-8 months maybe, twice a month. And it stirred up some dust. I mean, it definitely got people talking. But again, it if you don't want to believe, you don't see it. So knowing that the media today is kind of geared toward video, that's where. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I'm going to start interviewing people. So we started a documentary.
Right. Now, what gets me is I live in Racine as well, and I notice the same things that you have, such as the problems which are going on, so supposedly happened at the time of Sona's Bar 602 Club, I believe. Correct me if I have the name of this establishment wrong. There's another bar in town, which I saw the video up on that guy, I think it was Racine Community Media, with a parking lot full of squad cars trying to handle huge parking problems, and I've yet to read about them being summoned to life and welfare to talk about these issues. Right,
double standard, Wayne. I mean, it's still happening today. The double standards there. It's again, it's a small town, so when you have go into why it happens, and this is just. I think it's part of it's the education. I think people don't know how government works, and I think if there's a segment minority people if the poverty level's higher, the education level is lower, and they don't really know how government works, so they're not going to understand it, even though they know they got screwed. They know they got screwed, and that's what brings people into protest. But they don't know why they got it, and that's really the institutionalized racism that goes on. I mean, that's the area you have to concentrate on. I mean, I have nothing wrong with people protesting, but what happens is as soon as somebody protests in Ferguson, Missouri, or Staten Island, or wherever, the first shot that's fired, or the first incident where something's happening. I mean, I saw one where the mom was beating on the kid, and sending him home, and that was big news. It takes away from the actual reason why people are there. But what they need to do, and when you have an issue, is hit that local government and get into those politics, because politicians, in my experience, are basically, if you scare them, they're under their bed, and they're not. They're like the wind. If the wind blows one direction, they're going to go that direction. And when you get politicians in office that are not representative of their constituents, they need to go, and you need to do that at a local level.
What gets me too is talking about we're in Wisconsin, the community we both live in, is our poverty rate. I believe I read in the paper was close to 24%. But the rate of turnout for the last election was under 10%. Unless we get people motivated to vote, and they're not going to vote, they don't feel they have any chance of changing anything, nothing's going to get changed. It's the problem is, how do we show the people, the city we're seeing, they have choices, but they got to go and vote. They got to participate.
It's a tough one, because, and that's how you get leaders that can run a group of people astray. And it really does come down to the constituents that really have to educate themselves and actually get involved with their local politics. And really the thing that I keep pushing is, go to City Hall, go to these meetings, step up, meet your representative for your district, and get involved, not just when they knock on your door and hand you a piece of literature and say, I'm a great guy. That's usually not the time. But
right, that's
you have to spend a little time with it, and I think part of it's the educational base. Are we really teaching civics? Are we educating the young kids today, in school, that they should be really involved in their local government? And I think civics are very important, because it leads to our basics of our Constitution.
I know that I was back in the day in high school. We had to memorize the preamble of the Constitution and understand what it meant and why it came about. They wanted us to do certain other things. And being a little farming community with things like going to local school board meetings, things like that, so we understood what was going on. Write a letter to our local elected representatives. Now my grandson is 13, and they're not encouraging him to do any of those things. In fact, when they found out that he went to the city common council a couple of years ago, because I took him because he was interested after seeing me in the car 25, the teacher says, "Well, wasn't that boring?"
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And that's how you get local leaders. That when you have you have local leaders who can get away with things, criminal or not, there's no one there. And especially in a smaller community, 100,000 or less, it becomes almost like a club. Well, I'm not going to prosecute him, even though I know he did it or whatever. But the kid selling the bag of dope on the corner, he's catching 3-4 years in prison. It's just this double standard. And I come from a construction background. It's as rough as you can get into it in a field. And when I look at this, and I can call out white privilege, and I always thought, I heard this, it's all BS. There is a white privilege, because it is where, we've got this standard because we're doing the right thing, because we understand the functions of how things work, and we understand that this is the right way to go, even though it doesn't reflect the same feelings of maybe some of the other constituents. We're in this position, and we can do this. And that's where, you get this calling of white privilege, because most of it's minority or Caucasians in these positions. So I understand where, the minority population is coming from and saying, hey, this is, it's true. And there is a certain amount of that. And part of it's, the fault of, I can go into the NAACP, and I can tell you stories about that locally, and the black churches, and how, this is all embedded. And there needs to be some major changes for races to come together in a community and work toward a common goal, because you always want an enemy. And I watched it in our own government. When you make an enemy, then there's a problem here. I don't understand it. All I heard is that this is not good, but they don't understand it. So
Right.
It functions for people in power.
Yes. And again, as we, I have a friend down South Alabama, and he looks around here. I send the links for the stories going on here. And he says, as he told me, and this is more or less a quote, is it seems in his opinion that the only business an African-American can have in the city of Racine is to have a church. And the best way to make money to get a church is you get hooked into the black grants. And you only get that money as long as the local government thinks that you're safe. Then they give you the money. As soon as you speak out of turn, go away.
Scraps from the table, Wayne. And that's what I call it, because they're not at the table, but they're getting a few scraps off the table. And that suffices. And where is the leaders? I mean, really. I mean, I don't, there's some leaders out there that are self-serving, but, where are the real leaders? And I hope there's some young people that kind of come up and take those reins. And, I mean, what you need is an educational leaders. You need people to, expand on the fact that you need to be more in tune to your communities. And, when there's a disconnect in your community, no pride of ownership, well, then you burn it down. And
you're right. Who cares?
Right.
I mean, why would
that disconnect became a reason. There was a reason for that disconnect. It just wasn't, oh, hell, I don't care,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why would the person down the street where I live care about the home they rent when they don't think they ever can get better than that? Why would they bother? Why would they care? They won't. All they care about is making sure they have enough to eat. And the kids maybe have a safe place. I mean, there's a whole thing about what drives poverty and makes people stay in poverty. It's a whole sad subject, but rather fascinating. We need to do a show on that at sometime on this show, so people have more of that understanding. But one of the things that the movie addressed, which I want to bring up in particular, is what happened with the cruise in. Every time I see that part of the movie, every time I go back in time and look at newspaper articles about what happened at that bar, I just shake my head and wonder. So for the sake of the audience, briefly, can you go into the story of the Cruise Inn?
The Cruise Inn was a tavern owned by Mexican Americans. It was a husband, wife. They had three sons actually, but two actually worked in the restaurant portion of the bar, young. When I started to research, I didn't know. I just started back in the furthest I could get the minutes back online, and I got them, and I started to go through. Well, the first year was 2000. I think it was 2006. I get this where they're taking their license away. Their license, and I'm, weren't coming in and weren't being, told. There was no incidents that I could see, that amounted to anything, and they took their license away. Well, I started to really kind of dig into it, and the funny thing is, I had been, been kind of bothering me. I had kind of been started to research, and I thought, well, how do I ever get a hold of this guy? I don't know who he is and where he is. So anyway, I all of a sudden one day I just decided I'm going to take a ride, and I had talked to a fellow I knew, and I said, this. He said, well, I think I know him, but he gave me a general area. So I went and just driving through, and then I yelled out the window to a guy, and I said, hey, you know this guy? And he said, that's me. So it was just like this one in a million. But anyway, I meet him, and I started to talk to him. I said, I had a building and, similar things. Oh, man, he said, I'd tell you my story. Well, here it comes. He owned a bar, and it was an older building. It was the actual first post office in the city of Racine. But it was next to the train station. And the train was, the Metro from Chicago was going to come into Racine during this period of time. And they were, looking at, this train station, this old kind of abandoned train station that the city currently owned. And they were going to remodel it, and it would have been this new train station. Well, his bar sat relatively close, but on the other side of the tracks. And he owned the baggage buildings, which were buildings where the train would come off one side, let the passengers on the other side. They would toss the bags into the buildings, and then they would, run them over, wheel them over, tunnel them over, whatever, to the passengers for pickup. Well, during this period of time, he had been contacted by the city officials, on different times. Would you interested in selling your building? No, I don't want to sell it. And it's my family owns it. We've owned it for a number of years, and we're going to keep it. Well, all of a sudden he started to get notices that his grass was too long. There was, underage drinking happening at his cited. Of course, he never was cited. He was just hauled in and then dismissed. And just these numerous things, this was the roof was this. And then all of a sudden there was an incident at the bar where a husband and wife were getting divorced, and they got into a fight, and they called him in. I mean, literally called him in. And I'm going to get into that, put it in the paper a month after it happened, right before they were going to call him into the committee to take his license. They came in and said, well, this is, they don't speak English very well, somewhat at a disadvantage, and, well, we're going to take it away. So they go through this committee, right before they take the license away, the building is sold to the city of Racine. And this is what triggered it for me. It's like, why would you sell it? And instead of going to have their license taken away, the article says, it's just a little blurb article, they decide to sell to the city. Well, when I talked to him about it, he said, we don't want to sell. We had to. They told me my building would be worthless, and he sold it for half the value of what it should have been sold for at the time. But the mayor and some of the city officials had been there, and they wanted that building. That's really what it was. They wanted that building because they were going to remodel that train station, and this particular bar, former older building, would have been used in some sort of capacity. There were federal grant dollars available at the time, and, of course, these folks never got any of it. And the tenants that were living there never were relocated. The one tenant actually told me he ended up going down to the park. They kicked him out. He had no place to go, so he went down and pitched a tent in the park for a month and a half before he could get into, somebody would take him in, where his Social Security check would come in and he could, get himself a room. That was, and in the meantime, there's one of the bar owners in town in this, I call it the club, has got a first right of refusal on the building. Now, when he leaves the building, they tell him you can't take any of your personal belongings. So the bar is fully stocked, including the liquor. I mean, it's just so blatant that you sometimes shake your head like, how does this happen? And it goes on, and nobody cared. And it went on for a number of years until I was able to find those and then, bring them into the fold kind of and say, hey, would you guys mind to go? And they were willing. They were more than willing. I want to tell our story. We felt we got screwed, but we didn't, they did it to us kind of thing.
Going back for the explanation, when you talk about Metro, some of them call it KRM, Kenosha, Milwaukee, Racine Railroad, run supposedly from the Chicago area, I think the Kenosha area, up to Milwaukee. At that time, Mayor Becker and then following him, Mayor John Dickert, both said that if we had KRM come to the city, that it would make I'll paraphrase, the streets would be lined with gold because people would move to Racine because they want to move in Racine. And KRM would make that happen, right?
Right. Oh, it was definitely touted as a big plus for the city, which of course never happened.
Right. Well, the KRM
was empty today. Yeah.
Because KRM has never come to town. In fact, that area of the train station now, which is a couple of acres, has never been even looked at to be developed further because there's no reason to, because there's nothing to do there.
Right. So you took somebody out of their livelihood for, in the hopes that something else would happen, But, I mean, that's, again, where, government goes awry. Is that really the way government should work? I mean, obviously, maybe in in Russia, maybe it works like that, but this is where you get concerns.
Obviously, because here we have a group of Hispanics who've done nothing wrong, to my belief, have been targeted, had their rights taken away from them in order to be manipulated to sell the city or see a building that the city, run by white people, the only way I can see it, run by white people, could take advantage of them. And basically, I'll use a rough language here, fuck them over a barrel because they can. What power do they have? Right.
That's exactly what happened, truthfully. And the youngest son, which is actually in, I think he for political science, I think he got kind of a earful of how it didn't work for him. He went on to school for political science. But I talked to him. He said, I knew what was going on, but I'm 16 years old. He says, I have, he said, I watched it. He said, I watched my folks go through this. And of course, they were, what went on, and the father was a truck driver, and the mother would run the restaurant and bar. And, he said they fought. So, I mean, it creates a bigger problem, for the family. I mean, not only you expect, you've got business owners. You've got minority business owners who are strengthening your community, and you come in to just, they just disregard that fact, and we're going to just take the building because we think it's for the betterment of our community, instead of, here you have someone that's already there. Instead of saying, hey,
right.
We've got a great opportunity here, we're going to take you out and we're going to put the right people in there because, we know what's better for the community. And that's where it really needs to be investigated in a bigger scale than what I can give, But, and I've written to the Justice Department, I've written to the FBI, I've written to the ACLU, NAACP. I mean, it's a tough sell. I don't know if it's happening so much everywhere else that they're overloaded. I just, I don't know what it takes to get them off square one.
I don't either. I mean, here in Racine, if you want information from the government, you have to often do what they call office register requests, which is something that takes time and money. And in my experience, doing reporting in the city for a while, they simply don't have to listen to you. You can request it, but they say no. What are you going to take them to court?
Right. Well, it's to a degree of almost lawlessness. I mean, you don't have because we don't like it, we don't hear it. An ethics complaint, and I think you're familiar with that. Yeah. Wayne actually went in with an ethics complaint, and instead of really officially looking at this and dissecting it in the way it should be looked at, and using the ordinances and statutes to really look at it, we set up a campaign contributors and friends on the board who basically don't look at the evidence or don't want it or don't call it in. I mean, it's the kangaroo court of ethics.
Well, anything else? I mean, we have interlocking boards run by, and again, the mayor, whoever it might be, will appoint people that they can politically rely on to boards, be it Republican or Democrat. That's just the way that it does. Okay, I understand that. But there comes a time when ethics and doing the right thing should supersede politics. Case in point, we have a person in Racine, Doug Nicholson, who's a friend of the mayor, who owns at least 2 bars in downtown Racine, who sits on boards, right, controlling what goes on in the city of Racine. And now he's on another board, and he doesn't vote for things because, well, speculation is he can't vote on these things coming up before the redevelopment committee because he has a financial interest in those areas. What's going on with that?
Right. And I think that's your culture, political culture. That's what you've got. It's okay. We've been doing it so long that it's okay. No one looks at it. Nobody calls them on the carpet. And and I've been criticized. I mean, extensively. But I'm not backing down because I know that I'm right on these issues. But I expect my political representatives to stand up also, but they don't. And that's the disturbing part. When you have this political culture that says, well, I just want to get along and I just want to make sure things, go good. And I've heard it multiple times, well, that's what the mayor wants. Well, the mayor isn't the king. You're a representative of your district or whatever, your area. I mean, and when you're shown documentation, when you're shown things and you elect to look the other way, it's time for you to go. And that's where the electoral has to understand. And that's why, obviously, pattern of practice.
Right. I mean, it helps to help educate people with what's going on, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't do anything about it if you don't know. But once you do know, then I think people, if they thought they had an opportunity to do something to change things, would.
I think you're right. But there's a certain amount of fear, too.
Yeah.
There's egos involved. Ego's a powerful thing, when you think that I'm going to be, and I like to touch on bad public light because that is a huge factor in politicians and their decisions. How's this going to show on the television, or how am I going to be written about? And I certainly don't want, to take a side on something that possibly isn't popular. Let's talk.
Right.
And that public light is very powerful, a tool used by politicians when they can get a hold of a media source, and they can use that media source to put individuals, businesses, whatever, in bad public light. Well, then that perception is that you want that business has to go, or those individuals have to go, or that school isn't functioning correctly. That is very powerful. And even though that story may never get told, and again, you're in a smaller community, and this is where you kind of look, follow the money. I mean, is this media outlet collecting money from the city? Are they a beneficiary of a large amount of money? Well, they're not going to come in and cut, I'm not going to, bite the hand that feeds me. So, I get this press release, and it sounds good. I'm not really going to investigate it. And you have reporters that are, somewhat, I don't think, whatever, they don't investigate. So you get this bad public light. Well, then the perception is, in the community that is watching says, ooh, that's bad. That doesn't work. And we got to change that. And then when the politician comes up and he'll talk about this issue, and I saved the city from these, the cruise in, a perfect example of slashing, they called it. The bottle cap went across this woman's husband and wife fought. She took a bottle cap, ran it across their throat, saying he slashed her, he ran out. Well, the cops knew it. I read the police reports, and his police reports were so one-sided. And they came in with the paper of slashing. Well, there was no slashing, but it was a month after. So it's obvious that they called the paper and said, we had this incident. Well, if the incident happened, it was such a big incident, why didn't they write about it when it happened? They had to be brought it to the attention because they needed it to take this license away from them, so they could they put them in bad public light. And,
right.
And that's not the only one. It goes on and on and on with that. But that's one of the patterns, the techniques in the pattern. And I kind of broke down that, and that's where pattern of practice came from.
Fascinating thing. I mean, it goes on here every day, and you'd think racism goes on in some places in South Carolina or Alabama or God forbid.
Right.
But no, we have it here in Wisconsin. Now, I understand that things. Actually, before I go there, let me address it another way. You also have politicians. You have two former aldermen in the film talking about their experiences too. Do you not?
I do. I did. I was able to get a couple former aldermen to go on camera. I did send an email to the city. I mean, I asked them all, and of course, none of them wanted to go on camera. They figured it was going to be negative. And I didn't come in with a narration. I let people just talk and let them tell their story. I didn't want this thing to be, like everybody's bad here, and I'm, slanting this thing. I put their stories out there. Everybody got a chance to tell their story, and I weaved it through, as the story went, it kind of weaved itself through their narration. But I did have a couple aldermen, and those are, and again, these are aldermen who stood up, who said, "Hey, we got a problem here, and I want to address some of these problems." And what happens is other aldermen, or in this particular instance, aldermen, they knew it, but they wouldn't stand up. So they decided that, well, I'll remain silent. Well, in one particular one, he, and this says it in the film, but they arrested him for having an argument with his wife. And this is before his election. He's running for alderman again, but they needed something on this guy. They had to get rid of this guy. So the headlines in the newspaper say officers, meaning police officers, recommend abuse charges for former alderman so-and-so. I mean, when did an officer have anything to do with recommending charges. So, but they didn't have the district attorney obviously didn't recommend charges at this point, but they needed to get that in the paper to put a negative connotation on it. And of course, he lost the election. The other one was an incident in a car, and I actually put him in the film, and he kind of leads it out. And that situation too was again way out of proportion. The police department, sheriff's department went way overboard to create an incident or create this thing to be this blown up, incident. And of course, he lost his position. He actually, I think he finally pleaded to disorderly conduct, I guess. I don't remember. But, I mean, it was a major, and he was frightened. I mean, you would be. But that's how it works. And that's where it can go to.
Yeah, it works. And what gets me with the one, Alderman Marcus, former Alderman Marcus, who was in the film, I mean, he was arrested right before the election, which came to me as quite a surprise. What also comes to me as no surprise is Alderman Marcus took the opportunity to go on local Car 25 on the George Meyer show, a local activist, many times, explaining things he had problems with the city, especially taxes and how taxes were being used. He went into detail. Boom, here we go. These are the numbers. This is what's wrong. And Car 25, where anybody with cable TV could see it and say, my God, this is wrong, and say, stop this from happening, right? Which is something that the city could not afford to keep going on.
Exactly. So now, Car 25. Now, all of a sudden, this is a community access channel, meaning citizens in the community can use it. Now, I never used it, per se, to go on and tell the story, but what I did was I used their filming of common councils and different committee meetings, and I would buy the film discs from them. They no longer are, because now they had a problem. Car 25 must change. I remember an article in the paper, Car 25 must change, and I knew right away they're going after Car 25 because people like yourself and George Myers were bringing up issues, and then aldermen would go on there. It wasn't this, you rah-rah, we're great, everything's fine, don't look around, don't look at the man behind the sheet there.
Don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. Right. Which is amazing, which shows to me and other people outside the city scene I don't want to use that word, I can't think of a better one, the desperation sometimes the city's in to keep the lid nailed shut because, heaven forbid, if people talk about the problems we have in the city, they won't come here and spend money. Right.
Now, I've talked to other business owners, and they know what's happening. But you know what their solution is? Well, as soon as I get a chance, I'm out of here. And that's why some cities succeed and other cities fail. And it's a regular map of how to not only take apart a city, but also how to actually control a city. If anybody, and I'm going to make my pitch here, if the Justice Department or the FBI, gladly contact me because I can give you everything I've got because it really does need to be investigated. There's an awful lot here.
Absolutely, an awful lot. What would be your contact information? Let's say an email where people could get a hold of you.
patternorpractice@gmail.com.
Okay.
Now, I'm also doing...
I'm sorry, I apologize. Go on.
No, and I'm also, I've got a website, patternorpractice.com, which has the film on it, and it has some, related type information on it. And then I'm starting a YouTube channel. Actually, I have a YouTube channel, Pattern of Practice. And what I'm going to start doing is breaking down. I'm going to do YouTube's kind of an informational YouTube of how to and what to recognize in a community. So, if somebody can grab it and just look at it and say, we've really got to take back. I mean, and we can go into a whole thing of, from Washington and how we've kind of lost control of our local, our government really to corporations and money. And, we need to get back to the citizens and how and work together as a community for the betterment of all.
Absolutely. What gets me is, I'm going to call it the good old boy club. is how quickly they form and how hard it is to penetrate, and how desperate people are to do so. I mean, fascinating idea. In my opinion, we have a newspaper that is Racine Journal Times, which, as I think a newspaper should act, is not acting anywhere close to being a newspaper, right? That's fine. They can run their business any way they want to. But yet, other things that have shown up try to replace them. I mean, you tried a paper, and I encourage you to do it again. Other groups start newspapers, which is no different than the Racine Journal Times. I don't see any real investigative reporting going on. I see nothing being printed that probably doesn't have that 100% support of Mayor Chad Diggert and his friends.
Well, when they pay the bills, Wayne. They pay the bills.
Yeah, they pay the bills.
Again, goes back, follow the money, really.
Yeah.
Anything I was looking for, at some point I stopped and said, all right, where's the money going? And sure, you'd find the pile of money, and that's the key. And I think that's everywhere. I mean, it's human nature. I mean, your egos and money, it all kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, but at some point, you have to say, is this the betterment of our overall community, and how are we going to leave it when we leave? How do we leave what we did, or how we looked at things? And I have to say that sometimes I'm just discouraged by some of the things I see, but I think if everybody did a little bit, it would certainly help.
Definitely. And I don't expect my politicians to be perfect. I know that's going to be the case. I know that being human, they will make mistakes. God, I make my share. Trust my wife, right? At that same time, I expect them to do the best job they know how. And when you ask them what's going on, for them to be forthright and honest with you about what's happening. Right.
Wayne, I've heard of a lot of them. I listen to them, and then I check on their statistics, and they're lying. So my thing is, if their mouth is moving, they're usually lying, and it proved me that you're telling me the truth, because I check it on you. I will check you, and so. But there is a lawsuit. There is a lawsuit. I can't get into the details of it, but there is a lawsuit for. At the end of this, you're going to say, what where are these folks and what's happening? But they were able to put together a lawsuit. Of course, I was the reason why, and should have never got this information out. But the fact is that there is a lawsuit, and it's going through the federal court system now, and I guess we'll just wait and see where that ends up. But and that's. Truthfully, that will probably change more things than the district attorney, the FBI, or the Justice Department. When you come in, and if you are successful and you can change things and take away money seems to be the great, the fear that I lose my position and my money. I mean, I call it the 50-year-old white man syndrome. I'm scared of everything. And, I'm willing to bend over in an airport and have somebody stick a finger at my rear end to make me feel safe. I mean, to me, that's where we're at. And that 50-year-old white man ought to wake up and say, hey, your rights are being disintegrating around you. And it's time to step up and say, hey, this isn't right. And there are people out there.
There are. And the thing is, I have to say this, it's the shame, as the German philosopher said, one day they came against the gypsies, and I didn't speak out because I'm not a gypsy. It was a long list. And he finally says, and one day they came and got me, and there's no one left to speak out for me. Because if we don't stand up and speak out with what we see as wrong, be it to ourselves or our neighbors, maybe to someone of color, maybe with someone of a different religion, and stand up and support them when they think they're being harmed, we're all pretty much screwed.
Right, exactly. Be tolerant. I mean, everybody has certain things. I mean, they have different religions, they have different beliefs. I mean, and that's what makes it great. And the diversity is what makes things work and are great. And the greatest cities are the ones that are most diversified, has the most culture, has the I want to be there type. And if you don't, and any little city can have that, but you've got to break the cycle that this fear that gets into a community.
I think you're right. I mean, to me, I don't know what's going on in Racine. I don't understand I'll leave this to you. Perhaps the last question we can be talking about this for a minute is the why. To have all these things take place, to have all the effort, money, expense, trouble that the city of Racine, the good old place, if I may better explain it, go to remove the black bar owners, the Hispanic bar owner, the Asian restaurant owner from downtown Racine. Why?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's nothing better to do. I mean, what's your speculation?
Well, I don't know all the I'm gonna go back to my theory on money. There's only so many dollars that are spent in a community on groceries, on entertainment, on different things, and I feel that they were tapping into those markets, doing a better job. So instead of saying, hey, welcome, let's grow, let's eliminate them because now you've tapped into my market. And I think it comes down to money, and I think it comes down to money and power. And I think that is one of the reasons why. Do I think it's all about race? It is about race, but it's not necessarily all about race. It's about money and ego and power. And if I lose money, I lose my power. If I lose my power, then my ego starts to slip. So am I the expert on it? No, not a long shot. But I mean, it's what I see.
Right. I mean, we're only again speculating because I think perhaps we'll know more information should it hit the federal court. Because if the federal courtroom, the federal court isn't going to play. They will be compelled to testify. They will be compelled to bring documents.
Right.
They won't be able to deny open records requests, as they like to do to me, it seems. If something's subpoenaed, they better have it.
Right. Exactly.
And then those all records
and I hope that works.
You can see.
Right. Well, I'm kind of looking forward to that case to see if they can, break open some of these. I mean, it's in the federal court, so we'll see where, at least a portion of it. I mean, there's plenty to do, but this seems at least, kind of a spirit into it a little bit and see what opens up.
At least this comes in front of the federal courthouse in Milwaukee in October, does it not?
I think it's November. I think the middle of November.
Okay, push back again.
Friday.
November. Okay. November. Okay, which is not that far away.
No.
Which is not that far away.
No.
And it's only going to be, and again, this isn't the only one. We have yet another racially based federal court case going on as we speak. Do we not?
We do. I believe it's a funeral home that came into Racine, wanted to have purchase a building. Actually, I think they had signed offer on it, and they were, again, it was the pattern. We're going to overlay a lot of restrictions on this particular individual and his business, and cause a situation, again, bad public light, the whole thing, no parking. I mean, you're in the downtown type area, and they considered parking. The building was there for the last 100 years, and they had no problem with parking. But when he wants it as parking, and then he had to create for the funeral home, he would have had to create a parade. They had to shuttle people. I mean, they made it so ridiculously, almost crazy, that he finally withdrew, or they rejected him, I believe, and then the neighbor bought it 45 days later. The competing former, or the competing.
Right.
I mean,
right.
It's blatant. You watch it and you watch the video, and it's. But here's the thing: everybody can watch it, but nothing happens. You know what I mean? I mean, here it is. I mean, I watch it. It's blatant as it can be, but it just goes on. That's the way we operate. And
that's the way we operate. And then we go.
Like, it's amazing. I watch these aldermen sometimes. I look at their faces. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, you can't be that dense. But
right, and then we'll get talked to the Meredith Funeral Home, which is the people group that bought what they call the women's home. Then what will happen with Mound Cemetery and Indian Mounds there. I mean, it's like an onion. You peel off one layer, there's yet another layer, followed by another layer, followed by another layer.
Exactly. And unless you have people in like your show, Wayne, I mean, it does. I mean, it brings it outside of Racine, and that's definitely what needs to be done. And I'm sure there's other communities that have the same problems, but and I'll tell you, these cell phones and the media and the YouTubes, I mean, it's a new era. And I look at it like, it's not hitting the streets. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, so, I mean, I knew, protesting. Not that I was a big protester, I mean, I was probably more conservative than people would realize. But today, though, the cell phone and these videos, I mean, this is opening things up, opening people's eyes, and you can't keep that contained because now anybody can go on a computer or make a video or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's encouraging, I guess.
Right. Well, that's all the time we have for the show, but could you please give us your contact information one more time, sir?
Email patternorpractice@gmail.com, website patternorpractice.com.
And we can see the movie in its entirety for free today if we went to your webpage, correct?
Correct. 71 minutes.
Yes, I want to encourage everyone to please go to his webpage and watch that movie and communicate with him with what you think about the movie. Give him his good points, his bad points, what you would do to further investigate the story, because we can do so much more with this story with your guidance and your help. We're not talking economic, we're talking ideas here. And we can all do something when it comes to the idea bank, I think. Well, sir, I very much appreciate you being on the show. I know the time you spent, the time you had to give up to do the movie, everything that you've done for the community. You're one of the good ones for what it's worth, sir.
I appreciate that, Wayne.
All right, talk to you later.
Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Now, lately, I also want to thank Hispanic News Online for allowing me to post elements of this show on their webpage. This one will go up there today. It will be sent to them today. They may not be able to get to it today. It will be sent to them to be put up there at their convenience. People, I do this show being about the subject we do about, the issues on different things with farming, with what we talked about, the guy in the H2A program, the problems that we have with these things going on, the problems I hope to be talking about people suffering from Gulf War syndrome in the near future. I mean, these are problems that we have to address. We have to know about them so we can talk about them. Again, I'm not expecting everything to be perfect. I'm not. I'm expecting that we try. I'm expecting that we try to do a better job. The least we can do for our fellow Americans, as Richard Nixon would say. Again, this is a show of entertainment and opinion. Your entertainment opinion may definitely vary. You might actually like some of the shows which are on the Sci-Fi Channel. Anyway, my email is WCLINGMAN@wi.r.com. Talk to you all later. Bye.